Happy Tuesday, everyone. My name is Pratik Patel, and I'm a technology consultant with Ingram Micro. I'm also your host for today's Tech Talk. In this session, we're going to explore how hybrid cloud and multi-cloud solutions can help customers up their data center game. As the world becomes increasingly digital, there is a demand on businesses and organizations to leverage the power of technology so they can drive operations and stay ahead of the competition. And with the rapid advancement in cloud computing, businesses are presented with numerous options to choose from for hosting their applications, data, and workloads. Plus, with the rise of the strategies of such as digital transformation and cloud first, the demand for robust and flexible data centers has never been higher. However, with the increasing amount of data being generated and stored comes the challenge of just managing it effectively. This is where the concept of hybrid cloud, distributed cloud, and multi-cloud solutions come into play. For that reason, we're going to explore these technologies and learn how they can be leveraged. So whether you're a seasoned IT professional or just starting to dive into the world of cloud computing, today's session will provide you valuable insights into the benefits, challenges, and considerations that come along with adopting these technologies. And to help make sense of it all, joining me today are John Enciso, a field CTO with Lenovo. Thank you for joining us, John. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as CTO and what advice you have for anyone that wants to, let's say, stay updated with the latest technologies, trends, and innovations?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, first off. Thank you for everybody for joining. So a field CTO, essentially my job is to look 18, 24, 36 months out into the future and try and understand where technology is going to take us and what type of business trends are we going to be looking at trying to solve. So it's really a very strategic role. Not to say that I don't do tactical things like help architect solutions, but it's focused primarily on helping us as Lenovo and our partners figure out how to position the technology we have to solve some of those strategic business problems. That's really what I do. And in terms of how do I stay up to date, Google is my friend, frankly. I create complex Google searches, save those, and then I get I have a data feed that comes in. Sorry, Google, I didn't mean to get you going there. I get daily alerts. So I actually book out, and if you don't do this, I'd recommend you do. I'd book out about 30 minutes in the morning to just do nothing but read the news from those alerts.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you, John. Next, we have Tommy Mack, a chief technologist with Ingram Micro. I'm so glad you could join us, Tommy. Could you share some details about what a chief technologist does, and what do you see as the biggest challenges that your channel partners are facing today?
So hi everyone. Hi Pratik. Thanks for having me on here. Right. I guess John stole my thunder there. Right. We basically do the same job. I do it for Ingram Micro and I do it for partners. So my role is to look into the future, understand the technology trends, the inflection points in the market, and how they affect business challenges, business outcomes, right? And then how does Ingram build the right services, offerings, positions all of those technologies for our partners and enables our partners to go out and have those conversations, right? So yeah, we do very much the same job, and technology moves so quickly. There's so much of it out there, right? So I help partners and Ingram sort of sort through that chaff, right? Sort through the noise and figure out what is really meaningful for them. Because the biggest challenges for our partners is sorting through all of that noise, right? And then talking to their clients about what's really relevant, right? What's going to really move the needle for their client, and build the right skills to do so. Everything is moving at breakneck speed, so they need to rely on partners, be it the vendor partners, be it Ingram Micro, to help them through that journey. And that's by far the biggest challenge for partners, is just keeping up with everything and making the right investments into the right areas to service their clients.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Tommy. Hopefully you can expand a little bit on, further down when we get to the actual part of the interview process. But Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. And finally, we have David Eaton, a VMware technology consultant with Ingram Micro. So happy to have you on, David. Can you tell us about your role and experience in the industry, and what do you really enjoy about working with the channel partner? Because I know that's a completely different game than just working with a customer.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I've been with Ingram for about 4.5 years now, so it's been a while. I've been supporting VMware for about 15, 16 years, so it's been quite a while on this product line, off and on. Working with partners is really kind of my dream job, if you will. I'm not responsible for sales necessarily. They are, but I can certainly help enable them and help them grow their business and grow the revenue. So really, at the end of the day, my job is to help partners grow their technical knowledge, as well as hopefully spur some sales conversations that come along with that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, David. So before we begin, let's get some mechanics out of the way. First, we'll share the recording link once it's posted on YouTube. And second, since this event is all about helping you really up your game, please locate the chat function now so you can put your questions and comments in there. And don't be shy about asking questions in the middle, because I love interrupting these guys, because once they start talking, they have a flow, and I have no problem stopping them at any time. So, with that said, now let's get this conversation started. Tommy, one of the many hats you wear, I think you were being a little modest when you introduced yourself, but you're part of the Ingram Micro Data Center Tech Force. So that really gives you that valuable insight into the channel for hybrid and multi-cloud solutions. So first, if you could kind of help us out with trying to tell us give us an overview of what that Tech Force is, and really then help our audience understand the concepts of hybrid and multi-cloud. And what I really want to mention is, part of the Tech Force, this is one of the 10 trends that the Tech Force really highlights. So this should be really good.
Yeah, no, of course, that's a great question, right? And I guess this is the sales part of Ingram Micro, and talking about the great people that we have. And we do have a great number of folks within the organization, and a lot of subject matter experts. And that's reflected in our Tech Force, right? So we brought all of these people together across a lot of different domain areas, a lot of different categories of technology, right? Different levels of experience in their respective fields. And they support our Tech Force across the trends that you had mentioned, the 10 trends that we have. And we use our experience, the best practices that we've built over time in working with our partners, with the vendors that we support as well, to help address those challenges for partners to build practice areas, be it in multi and the hybrid cloud, be it in AI and a lot of other areas. So that's basically the gist of the Tech Force, is bringing together our subject matter experts so they can engage with our partners in a consistent manner, right? And our partners get a consistent experience. To your question about the topic at hand, right? So multi-hybrid cloud has been a significant journey for partners and vendors alike, and their clients, right? We've seen the evolution of virtualization, various different levels of abstraction, and then this phenomenal growth in what we call cloud today, right? And now we need to demystify what cloud is, rather than being saying that it's a place. It's really a operating model, right, that people have now adopted as how they want to consume technology. Now they've once they've adopted that concept of that cloud operating model, it's not one size fits all, right? Everyone's different in terms of the workloads that they run, the applications that they run, their maturity of their business and operations. So someone in retail versus banking, they have different compliance and regulatory things that they have to adhere to too. And sometimes cloud doesn't fit, right? They have to look at different ways of solving those problems. And funny enough, that's required some industries and some customers to repatriate their workloads because of the challenges that they had for security, compliance, what have you, right? So now we have the need for a hybrid cloud. Hybrid meaning, some of that infrastructure may sit in a data center that is controlled by the customer, and some of that, some of those workloads sit in AWS or Azure or name the cloud, right? And then they may have a SaaS offering. SaaS is cloud as well, right? So software as a service that is consumed. Most people use things like, Microsoft with their Microsoft 365 or Google's, suites, right? So that's all considered cloud as well. So when you've got all of these things, coming together to solve for business challenges, you're inherently already in a multi-cloud, right, environment. How you manage that is now the most difficult part, right? Managing all these various different silos of resources and spend. Ultimately, it comes down to spend, right? So adjusting all of that is one of the biggest challenges. So we're, at Ingram, focused on helping our partners and their clients through that journey and understanding what workload should sit where for which reasons, right?
Okay. So then, Tommy, to expand on that a little further, now that we understand, hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, what are really the benefits and challenges that businesses can expect, when they're looking to adopt this type of a strategy? And also, does that really help them in the overall, help them achieve their overall goals?
Well, as I mentioned in my last comment there, spend. Ultimately, a lot of customers will focus on how much does it cost to run their mission critical, business critical infrastructure and workloads, right? And what sort of yield does it get? If the yield in AWS is lower, if it costs them far too much to run that workload there, what's the alternative, right? Do they repatriate that workload and run that locally, right? Maybe they do that because they get better control, right? Or of that spend, they get better, maybe they've been hit with regulatory fines. Who knows? There's so many different factors out there that your customers have to acknowledge that, we talked about the challenges prior for partners, learning all of that, right? And identifying that for the clients is where the value comes into play, right? Where everyone's looking for, how do we inject value? How do we create value in all of our conversations? So, learning about the end users, learning about their industry, and show them, how they can trim costs, especially now with all the macroeconomics that we're seeing today. That is a good reason to move from the cloud, right? If you can show them, I will save from your $250,000 a month AWS bill, right, and cut that down by half by moving those workloads, so you get a better yield from the technology spend. They'll do that all day long.
Right. Perfect. So talking about challenges, John, in our last discussion back in 2022, actually, we talked about the potential for customers to transfer their technical debt to the cloud. What are your thoughts on this? And has your observation changed since our last conversation?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to piggyback on some things that Tommy said, right? So cloud as an operating model. Really what that means, it's how do you actually deploy, manage, monitor, and evaluate workloads that are put someplace, and whether that's on premise or the big three, it doesn't really matter. That's the cloud operating model. It's also the cloud operating model is that you spin up resources very quickly to try and be very business agile. So as the business needs requirements for a specific business use case, you spin up the resources, you manage, you monitor, you can attach those resources to a business ROI, And when it doesn't work, you shut it down. So it's that kind of build fast, fail fast mentality. That's really what a cloud operating model delivers. And what I've seen, I just published actually a kind of an internal research white paper on this. You know, this push to the cloud was driven by the expectation that when I went to the cloud, things would magically get better. And that hasn't happened. And a lot of customers are now kind of pumping the brakes and starting to really assess. And that's been part of the challenge is, you know, most of the customers that I've seen, they really haven't assessed how they're doing business and what workloads make sense, to, as Tommy's point, to put where. And so in that kind of race, because everybody wanted to be cloud native, cloud first, because it was every pundit under the sun has said, this is what you need to do to digitally transform. They basically picked up their junk drawer and moved it to the cloud, right? So all of their bad practices are what brought them there. And I honestly, I still see this today. It still has not changed. I just was reading an article. So there was an article on InfoWorld where David Linthicum talks about cloud repatriation. There was an article that I was reading that talked about the fact that, you know, some of the biggest challenges are controlling cloud costs. Well, the reason cloud costs are out of control is because there's no operational rigor. And that's part of that technical debt. If I'm, you know, great, I'm not patching servers anymore. Cool, but what have you done? Are you still manually spinning up virtual machine instances? Has your development team created the interfaces for all of your applications to work together? Because that's one of the other challenges, right? It's not just spinning up virtual machines. And that's been the challenge since day one. And that's where all the technical debt comes from. It's trying to make all those applications mesh together and work in a coherent fashion. And they still don't have that. And it's actually gotten worse with the proliferation of SaaS offerings and the simplicity of spinning things up in the cloud. You know, I had a conversation with a CIO a couple of weeks ago, and that was his big concern is we have SaaS offerings everywhere. I've got data flowing everywhere. I've got stuff all over the place, and I can't manage my data. And that's what costs me the most money. Running virtual machines doesn't cost me a lot of money at the end of the day. It's making that data highly available, because then I have to figure out, well, how many availability zones do I put it in? How do I back it up? What kind of performance do I need for the storage? And does it make sense to put that in the cloud or on premise? Right? And that's really what's driving this hybrid IT, hybrid cloud push is pump the brakes. We're not doing stuff right. Why am I going to pay the stupid tax out in the cloud when I can learn on premise? You know, that's the kind of the premise of that Andreessen and Horowitz article from, I think it was 2022, 2021, that talks about, you know, if you're a startup, you should be in the cloud. Once you develop the operational rigor, there's no reason everything needs to stay in the cloud, because you can now do that on-prem just as easily.
Perfect. So along the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud conversation, there's a concept called hybrid multi-cloud. And to me, you know, it just sounds like that this is just like another evolutionary step in cloud computing. What are your thoughts on this development?
Yeah, actually, I'm trying to change the script. So hybrid multi-cloud is just honestly, it's redundant, because if you're running a cloud on premise and you're running a cloud and you're running public cloud, you're running public cloud. You're running hybrid cloud and you're running multi-cloud. I prefer to call it distributed cloud, because now it starts to take into account this concept of workloads at the edge, workloads in a data center. Some of those may be legacy, and legacy's got a bad rap. Legacy's been running the world for a long time. But those traditional legacy or data intensive workloads, and then public cloud providers, whether that's SaaS, PaaS, or infrastructure as a service, right? The reality is that's where most of our customers are going to be operating in for the foreseeable future. And anybody that's not trying to understand how to manage, monitor, orchestrate, automate in that distributed cloud world is going to end up paying exorbitant amounts of money. They're going to open themselves up to security vulnerabilities, and they're going to make strategic, technical decisions by pundit instead of by what's right for the business. And I think a lot of that's what's gotten us where we are.
Sounds like technical debt all over again, right?
100%. 100%.
Perfect. Yep, thanks. So let's shift gears a little bit. David, I understand VMware enables organizations to really, to build and manage hybrid and multi-cloud environments that are both, secure and flexible. First, I don't want you to spill the secret sauce here, but how do they accomplish that? And actually spill the secret sauce here, but and then how does it really help customers to integrate, just like we talked about, on-premises and a cloud-based infrastructure, for that seamless access and data management?
Yeah, so anybody that's on this call that knows me from previous experience knows that I've been touting vSphere as the first cloud operating system, right? So really, VMware's been touting vSphere since vSphere 5. So 3 editions ago, versions ago, they've been talking about the cloud. But if you've ever seen the Microsoft commercials in the past, like the people in the airport and they upload a picture to the cloud and they're calling, yay, cloud. Everybody's kind of definition of the cloud is different. VMware's definition of the cloud is essentially, it's either your computers or somebody else's computers. But at the end of the day, our software is going to work on all of it. So vSphere allows customers to deploy virtual machines, and then they have the vCenter to manage everything, which is kind of a high level overview. Is vSphere is just a suite of features that go in that plug into the hypervisor. And the nice thing about VMware and the way that VMware has built out their cloud solution, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple questions here, but the overall kind of cloud platform that vSphere creates allows users to take an entire data center and move it from one physical location, like on physical machine someplace, and move it to another place. And all the while it's still running. And, with that, and John has touched on it, Tommy has touched on it, I've kind of just touched on it. There's a lot of complexity that goes into that. How do you manage all of that? And then, so VMware has a product that currently almost every single vSphere customer that's out there right now has that product sitting on a shelf someplace, a virtual shelf. It's called vRealize. Well, VMware's changed name again, and I'll talk a little bit more about ARIA and how they've kind of changed that and how they manage multi-cloud. But you'll kind of see all that stuff.
Perfect. So building on that point, David, there are numerous public cloud platforms like the ones you kind of just talked about, the big 3, AWS, Azure, GCP. How does VMware ensure compatibility with those public cloud platforms and really also maintain data security and compliance in that environment?
Yeah. So if you're familiar, if you remember, VMware kind of started off their cloud platform with it used to be called vCloud Air, which was essentially building out a VMware environment on a cloud provider. So it could be anybody that's running vSphere and they just have all their data over there. But they would still have the customer would still maintain control of it, and it would still be running under vSphere and vCenter and all that stuff. VMware kind of got away from that a little bit, and they partnered with AWS. I don't know, 10 years ago. It's been a while, and essentially AWS created a VMware infrastructure. So it's all VMware hardware or VMware-based hardware. So it has the hypervisor, has everything that's needed for a customer to deploy their entire infrastructure on AWS. That's given AWS a very long head start in the cloud journey for customers. So when customers think VMware Cloud, they automatically think AWS. In August, at VMware Explore in San Francisco, VMware announced basically they're creating the same sort of idea, the same mentality of VMC, so VMware Managed Cloud, on Dell, IBM, Oracle, Alibaba, Google, Azure, like pretty much, I think there's 8 major cloud partners that they have now essentially opened the doors up to and said, you can now create your own VMC on any one of these different cloud providers. And with that, they also announced that vRealize is now ARIA. So if you hear the term ARIA or you hear the term vRealize, it's the same thing, just for anybody on the call. That allows now customers to manage their workloads no matter where they are in the cloud. So whether they're on their own private cloud or in a public cloud like AWS or Azure, or Google, and you can manage them all with ARIA, which is basically a single pane of glass that helps you kind of see how the workloads are running, you can see cost analysis of those machines on that cloud. So it really kind of takes all that complexity and all that keeping track of things. We've talked about in the past how you get that people had server sprawl, physical server sprawl, so they bought virtualization to curb some of that, and then now you have virtual machine sprawl. So now you need to curb some of that, maybe put it in the cloud, so you're not spinning up new hardware for 1 or 2 VMs to run, and all of that can be abated by purchasing or running ARIA in the environment, which most customers have the capability to do that with the products that have been included with vSphere in the past, and basically be able to manage and see what those workloads are taking from a resource standpoint, and be able to better manage the hardware that they need, also to better manage the actual resources they would need, and then also give them better insights into where a virtual machine should reside or where it shouldn't.
So David, I'm not sure if guys asked this, but can you share some like best practices for implementing the hybrid and multi-cloud solutions?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's where VMware really kind of shines is that on-demand need for resources. So if anything has been told to us over the last couple of years is, shipping constraints can cause real big issues. Hardware has, producing hardware is hard to come by now. It's not as simple as they're not just coming over in droves. It's everything's now custom order, it seems. But the lead times are 6 to 8 weeks. Anybody that sells hardware knows that you still have those lead times. Where VMware kind of shines is that capability to spin up resources on demand. So if you have those relationships, if your customers have those relationships with their cloud providers, whether it's AWS or Google or Azure, to be able to spin up a virtual environment whenever it's needed. So maybe there's a holiday season, maybe you have a peak time for, CPAs. They may need resources available to them for tax season, and then after that, they don't need it. That's really where cloud should be used in this day and age, is have your data, keep it secure, but also if you need something, you can rent basically some data or rent some resources, move your virtual machines out to that workload space, automate that process, and when you're done, you bring it back in-house.
Perfect. Yep. I like that. I like that approach. So to continue the VMware themed conversation we have going, John, I understand Lenovo and VMware have had like a long-standing partnership for about like 20 years or so, and have jointly developed solutions such as the Lenovo xClarity integrators for vCenter. Could you provide some insight into those xClarity integrators and really why it is essential for Lenovo to continue with these types of partnerships?
Yeah, Pratik. So the way I like to look at it is, and we've all kind of talked about this up to now, is infrastructure and operations teams. It's complicated to manage infrastructure. And if you can centralize the operational activities into as few consoles as possible, you're going to make IT more efficient. You're also going to remove the complexity of managing and the opportunity for things to go wrong that create security incidents. And towards that end, we've invested a lot of money. We, Lenovo, have invested a lot of money into our systems management and automation strategy. And our strategy really is meet the customer where they are. I don't want to have you learn something new. If you spend your day as an operational person in vCenter, why would I make you go someplace else to surface alerts, to patch firmware, to upgrade things? So we've invested this time. So whether you want to click it or code it, we've built systems management automation that aligns with the major automation frameworks, Terraform, Ansible, Chef, Puppet, that integrates into vCenter, that is integrates into the other area components. So the old vRealize automation suite, the business ops manager. Again, to make it very simple for a customer to manage that infrastructure. And then we also tie into the other places like ServiceNow, which most customers are using as their ITSM. That is critical, because if I can give a customer a single unified view and they don't have to learn anything new, I reduce the burden for, there's a concept of a cognitive load. I reduce the cognitive load by not having them have to do something new. And by doing that, at the end of the day, I want transparent. I want to make my technology transparent so that the end users don't have to learn something new, right? The best compliment I ever get is, I didn't know your stuff was in my data center running VMware or whatever, because it just worked and I didn't have to do anything different from my day-to-day operations. And that's kind of our goal. And that's why we invest in that VMware relationship, those integrators, into those common tools.
Perfect. Yep. So Tommy, I know we kind of touched on this a couple times so far, but how does a customer go about evaluating which workloads are really best suited for the cloud? And then probably the best question I could ask is there a service that Ingram Micro can provide that can actually make that even easier?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I think we've touched upon some of the reasons during this call already, right? One of the things around technical debt, right? Is, do I want to continue to maintain that debt, right? How can I balance the books of the investments and the support that I have to continue to spend on those workloads? Would it make sense to, refactor that application so it works in the cloud, be it in whichever context that may be it a virtual machine abstraction, be it a containerized abstraction, right? Be it maybe replacing the application completely wholesale with a SaaS offering, right? There's plenty of those out there too. Or do I use, what's new today is the serverless stuff, right? Or function as a service, and pay for my consumption of that application or that outcome in a per call sort of experience, right? So there's many ways of doing that. It depends, on the application itself, what the availability out there in the market in terms of offerings are, and what I need to spend to make that conversion, right? Everyone has landed costs of their existing, application, what it's cost them so far, and whether or not they want to continue to make that spend. So it is very much a financial decision based on, investments and operational costs as well, long term, that CIOs and lines of business owners will have to make a decision on. They don't have to do it in a vacuum. That's why we have great partners, vendors as well, and at Ingram, right? So again, another commercial for Ingram in that respect. We do have great professional services that do exactly that. They do the assessment of the workload to determine what it would take to transform that workload into the various different ways of consuming it in the cloud, right? And it may be even breaking up that workload, so some of it still resides on premise and some of it is pushed or burst out to a cloud provider, right? If it's wildly changing in terms of its need for resources over a period of time. So, like web farms, in retail, web farms explode during Black Friday season, holiday season, right? But during the year, they may not need that capacity at all, right? So it makes sense to maybe run their baseline locally, right, to manage their costs and then burst out for periods of demand. And that can, you'll see those workflows across all types of industries. People maybe even do it as granularly as doing payroll, or I think David mentioned tax season, right? I believe, the tax season is very big in terms of how they burst out for compute workloads and labor, right? I believe it's one of the tax guys that becomes the biggest labor force in the country, right? During tax season. So but you'll find that across the board, and we at Ingram have resources that can help that. It's called Cloud Logic. Great seasoned individuals that run that team, and highly scalable in running those assessments. So anytime you have those conversations with your clients, and they don't know where to start, even if they have a great team of enterprise architects that they need to validate their numbers against. Ingram has that service that partners and can tap into.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you, Tommy. So just for everyone's note, in January, we actually did a tech talk with CloudLogic. So if you're interested, you could actually view that one, or even reach out to us and we can definitely get you in contact. But yeah, thank you, Tommy. David, we're talking about the workloads, and Tommy just mentioned containers. So that kind of brings me to my next question really is that, Kubernetes and containerization are really emerging trends that can be, that are helping to achieve that portability and consistency across those multiple clouds. How does VMware Tanzu enable organizations to really, deploy and manage modern applications across, multiple clouds?
Yeah, it's the beauty of Tanzu is it kind of creates that native platform to run those applications. So you can think of just a containerized application as a virtual machine. So it's a virtualized app, essentially. And what VMware has done to take a physical machine, like a large physical server that only uses 10% of its resources, to allowing you to put tens of virtual machines on that server and then utilize more of its resources. You kind of break up and kind of containerize the host itself, the virtualization server. Then you look at virtual machines like desktops, same sort of deal. You take a desktop and you containerize the components of the desktop. So the hardware, the software, which is the operating system, and then the application, right? So you take all of those different pieces. Now you're essentially virtualizing just the application. So you can take millions of lines of code and break them down into sections and containers, and that's what Kubernetes does. What VMware helps power and helps enable is with Tanzu is basically creating a platform that works within vSphere to run those applications. With all the Tanzu capabilities and the Spring language that VMware is essentially part of, it creates that kind of open source platform for users to go in, create their applications, and streamline the automation process of creating new applications, deploying those applications, and building in security with that. So yeah, that is essentially, if you have, in an application, just for anybody on the call that's not really familiar with what kind of Tanzu or what Kubernetes considers an application, it could be anything. It could be an app on your phone. It could be an app on your computer. It could be a web app. Most apps nowadays are web apps. Like it's essentially a website that your data is going to collect. Your phone, you notice that phones aren't blowing up from a storage standpoint anymore. They get more, but that's kind of where it sits. the applications themselves, most of that data is not sitting on your phone. It's sitting in the cloud, but which is somebody else's computer. So realistically, I mean, with Tanzu, it just kind of opens up the doors for customers that are not necessarily virtualizing desktops and servers anymore. Now they're virtualizing their applications, and it really gives Kubernetes and Tanzu work together and really allows that transition.
Okay, perfect. So then, David, can you tell us about any, future developments that VMware is working on that, that's related to that hybrid multi-cloud environment?
I gotta check. Did everybody sign an NDA? No, I'm kidding. Realistically, ARIA is kind of that future state when it comes to VMware. VMware laid it all out during Explore. They're going all in with Tanzu. They're going all in with ARIA. They're going all in with multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, just cloud in general. To kind of touch on John's comment earlier about Lenovo's product, I worked for a company called Blue Medora, which VMware purchased a number of years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't have my stock options when they purchased them. But the actual product itself was kind of breaking down the barriers. So, John hit on silos, right? And every IT department has silos. Most IT departments are looking at ways to break down those silos, but realistically, the way business has always been is if it's not a database problem, then it's got to be a software problem. Well, it's not the software. It's got to be the hardware. Well, it's not the hardware. It's the network. It's always this pointing fingers and no, it's your fault. It's your problem. It's your problem. It's not mine. Everything's working fine on my end. What ARIA does, and with the integrations they have with all of our manufacturer partners out there, is to be able to create dashboards that they can put up on screens in a NOC and say, this application is running slow because of this and this and this, and it basically gives you root cause analysis. That ability is going to the cloud now, where before it was like primarily VMware stuff, like with vCenter operations way back in the day, it was vSphere stuff, so just the VMware pieces. And then they expanded to vRealize, and that really opened the doors for everything below the hypervisor, so the hardware. It didn't really touch the software piece yet, but then they added that component a couple of years later with the ability to create those dashboards and working with the manufacturer partners. Really, VMware is helping enable and bringing together all these different manufacturers. So people that are standardized on one particular manufacturer, they don't necessarily need to stay standardized on that one manufacturer. So maybe they have somebody that's running, one of those that company's based out of Texas. They're running their hardware and they don't want to necessarily run that hardware anymore because they don't like the way they do this, that, or the other. They can then pick up and move that over to Lenovo and not losing that capability because they can see everything, and they can tie everything together with one pane of glass. That's really realistically where VMware is positioning things and where the business is moving. I think is moving to a, that multi-cloud environment, moving workloads freely between different cloud providers, on-premise, public cloud, wherever the case may be, but being able to see everything and manage everything and keep everything together without having to kind of taking the guesswork out of it. And then also all of that being done with in a secure fashion.
Okay, perfect. John, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Something that that David kind of talked about, brought a thought about xClarity 1. Can you talk about what that is and see would that be something that would help with the overall, reducing the complexity part of it?
Yes. So that's a later this year kind of a product, but essentially
Could I have not
the
said
goal
something?
of that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. The goal of that product is to really unify the management of infrastructure and endpoints and provide AI, essentially AI ops type of capability across the board. So that's a product that we've been working on for a while. Be later this year. That's about all I can talk about.
Don't worry, we'll make sure we cut that part out. Yeah, but yeah, thank you, everyone. So lastly, I have a question for all three of you, really. As technology leaders, how do you envision the future of cloud computing and see it evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? David, Tommy, and then John, I'd love to hear, your thoughts on this topic.
Do you want me to start?
Yep, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So I kind of touched on it just a second ago, but VMware has been positioning this cloud piece for at least 12 years now. I remember, just like I said, I remember vSphere 5 was the first cloud operating system, and everybody was like, what does cloud actually mean? And nobody really knew. I think if you look at the way that VMware is positioning their licensing, they're positioning their products, they're positioning their focus, it's all about SaaS and cloud and that mobility between site to site and flexibility, if you will, for applications and virtual machines. I think it's also working together with other vendors out there, whether it's a hardware vendor or a software vendor is also a key piece to it. If you look at all of VMware's recent acquisitions, it's all about cloud-based products, if you think about it. Security is also very, very, very important. And that's where you have extra, some of those other acquisitions that VMware's put in place. So VMware's been very clear about it for a number of years. They've been pushing cloud and pushing customers to move to a cloud type of environment. Whether they can keep everything on-prem, but VMware's been pushing for that subscription and term-based licensing for a while. They're now full on shoving customers to a SaaS type solution. So it's not a matter of if they're going to have customers move to a SaaS-based model. It's when, and there's been a big shift in vSphere 7 and now in vSphere 8. It's even been a bigger shift. That's where the kind of motions are going. It's being able to spin up services on demand and spin them back down, and then incorporating in the public cloud offerings. They're also incorporating the VMware Cloud Provider program as well. So it's allowing MSPs to get into the game as well and use their own hardware to host VMware environments for customers, maybe even their competitors, to host their data. But at the end of the day, VMware's trying to make it open, but also as secure as possible in a single platform for everything.
Go ahead, Tommy.
I think the future of cloud computing. Maybe John touched upon it earlier when he mentioned distributed, right? Clouds. I think the future of cloud becomes extremely blurred between what we consider public cloud and private cloud, hybrid clouds, right? I definitely see distributed cloud. I would actually prefer to call it decentralized cloud, right? I mean, there's where there's no single place, no single control plane that you can really identify. It's all together between where we see things locally versus core, very spread out. We see that with the event of things like swarm learning, right? That's an AI term, really trying to drive AI improvement models all the way to the edge where they collect data and improve the model from the edge on in. I see that affecting how cloud is deployed as well to support that, right? That's going to be a primary driver, a lot of technologies. So I think the future of cloud and 5 or 10 years, cloud is everywhere, right? So it's distributed and centralized all at the same time because it is everywhere. We're all part of it at that point. It is very interesting to see where it goes and how everyone participates in that, not just as large enterprises, but society and as a community, how we all participate in that together, right? I mean, that's where we're heading. I know a lot of people are afraid of things like AI and ChatGPT. I know that's the term du jour, right? But it's always very exciting for everyone, and hopefully everyone gets to participate.
Okay, John, go ahead.
I'm gonna break it up into a couple different components, really. From a pure technology manufacturer perspective, 5 to 10 years. I could talk for like 2 hours on this, but I'll try and sum it up. I think we're going to see a couple different things. I think we're going to see ARM move and start to make its way across multiple ecosystems. So beyond cloud, beyond edge, it's going to move into the data center, and that's going to be driven by application transformation. So applications moving and being written more around functions, more around containers that are very dynamically scalable than traditional monolithic ways we've deployed applications. I also think that from a technology perspective, and this is being driven by the cloud providers, but also being driven by technical enhancements, I'm going to call it the disaggregation of a server. We look at a server today, it's a CPU, which is the smarts, and then there's a network adapter, and there's some storage, and then there's maybe a GPU in there. I think we're going to see the intelligence that's in a server start to move to the outer edges initially of the bent metal, and then even go further, right? So you look at what VMware's done with DPUs with vSphere 8. So we're going to be able to run software-defined networking and a security and a storage stack on a network controller, and free those resources up so a CPU does nothing but scheduling virtual machines. We're looking at storage starting to become intelligent, where I'm literally going to be able to embed an ASIC in a drive so it can start to do more complex things. So instead of having to move the data necessarily to the CPU, I push the instruction to the drive, and the drive does that work on the component. So couple that with things like PCI Gen 5, PCI Gen 6, where we're going to get Compute Express Link, CXL, where we're going to start to see the compute disaggregate even more. I think that's going to drive massive changes in cloud, both in the cloud, public cloud providers, and on premise. The other thing I think we're going to see is this push, and if you look, the big three have already realized that multi-cloud is here to stay. It is not going to go away. And so if you look at AWS, they have Outpost. You look at Microsoft, they have Azure Stack HCI and Azure Stack Hub. You look at Google, they have Anthos. You look at Oracle, they have their obscenely expensive offering that basically makes you put their entire cloud in on-prem, right? So, I mean, we're seeing this massive push. And so I think what we're going to see is this big push from customers to drive.
Yeah, send me what you need. I can.
A unified, standardized control plane, right? And I think you see that with Azure Arc. We've got other customers, like we've got a partnership with Morpheus Data. They're doing that kind of common control plane, and then what we call platform engineering, right? Where you plug multiple things in and automate and control. There's going to be a big push and a big drive for that to allow people to actually leverage cloud resources appropriately. I think we're going to also see a big push for industry-specific clouds, where we're going to start to see, Microsoft has already done this, AWS has done this, right? AWS has a Fed cloud, Microsoft has a healthcare cloud. You're going to see the stratification in vertical clouds. And I think the last thing that we're going to see from a cloud perspective is that we're going to start seeing not only industry-specific clouds, but we're going to see the cloud providers start to use some of this Chat GPT and others to remove some of the operational burden, right? Chat GPT is already writing code from GitHub. So why can't I tell my AI engine, set up a VPC, this is what I want it to look like, here's the control pieces that I need, here's what it needs to connect to, and have it go out and start to make those connections and do that for me, being driven by the cloud provider's best practices. So I think we're going to see that move its way into cloud. And then I think the last is we're going to see some retrenchment. Infrastructure as services and data storage has been the bulk of where the cloud providers make their money. But I think we're going to see them start to retrench where they specialize and do do really, really well, right? You want large language models, computer vision, you're going to go to Google, right? You want integration with traditional back office stuff and your endpoint, Microsoft 365, you're gonna go to Azure and its business clouds. You want dynamic features, you want things continuing to spin up, spin down. Yeah, you're going to go to AWS, but all of those are going to connect back down. So you're going to have a core data center where you're running your crown jewels, right? Where you've learned your operational technique, resiliency, you understand how to do things efficiently and automate first. And then you're going to push data and workloads to the cloud that makes sense for that specific workload. And they're going to be AI tools to help us get there. That's my 5-year prognostication right there.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for that great insight. As we're, we wind down from today's session, I want to reiterate, something we kind of talked about before, but, Lenovo and VMware, have been collaborating for, like, what I say, 20 years, helping customers really solve their most complex virtualization and digital transformation need. As an OEM reseller for VMware solutions, Lenovo offers a broad range of VMware-based solutions in varying integration levels, really, where the solutions range from turnkey, the Lenovo Think Agile VX series of integrated systems, all the way to what I call the DIY or build your own engineered solution. So Lenovo is all about transparency. So there's no secret there. They can show you how to put it together. So they'll show you the secret sauce, And so for me, the way I've always looked at it was, especially for Think Agile, really, I'd see that portfolio delivering 2 key items that allow it to actually simplify IT infrastructure. First, the Think Agile VX series are just, basically building blocks for customers to design their own private cloud or even build a hybrid cloud environment. And second, it allows infrastructure to just disappear in the background. I know John kind of mentioned this, but, without really demanding any significant time or resource. So really for me, it sounds like, if you know who your vendor are of your server or any of your infrastructure is in your data center, or you have your support number memorized, then you're missing the whole point of selecting a solution that, that can simplify your IT and at least overall simplify your life. So, just to kind of keep that thought in mind. And also, I want to acknowledge that, I understand the topic is really complex and really, but as channel partners and value-added resellers, your customers are really relying on you to navigate that landscape. So I hope today's session has really provided that valuable insight, and really, we encourage you to continue to learn and explore this topic. If you need help getting started, reach out to the Ingram Micro team and we can help you really just connect the dots. What I'm going to be doing is I'll be putting in a link for next week's, next month's session. And, one final note, I want to thank my panelists, John Inciso, Tommy Mack, and Ed and David Eaton, really for sharing their wisdom and experience. Everyone, we hope this discussion has been really helpful, and we look forward to continuing the conversation offline. That's really it for now. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.